In this video, I'm going to show you 10 secret locations in The Witcher 3 that most players never experience. And let's start with what, in my opinion, is the creepiest location in the entire game. I'm talking about Lindenvale Cemetery, and more specifically, the incredibly unsettling interaction that happens in the graveyard. However, this interaction is subtle enough that you can walk right past it and be none the wiser. To the point that most players will arrive, focus on the quest objectives in the area, and then leave without ever noticing that someone, or more accurately something, has been watching them the entire time. When you first arrive at Lindenvale Cemetery, nothing really appears to be out of the ordinary. It's just another typical graveyard in Velen. There's a small chapel, gravestones, and some angel statues. However, as you start to move around the graveyard, you may start to notice something rather unusual and incredibly unnerving about the angel statues in particular. They appear to be watching you. This activates when you enter the small chapel. Then, after that, if you look at one of the statues, then turn away and move to a different position, when you look back, you'll find that it's still staring directly at you. No matter where you go, the angels always seem to be watching. Now, this is actually a reference to the weeping angels from the British television show Doctor Who, and in that show their strange and creepy following behaviour is explained by them being quantum locked, which results in them being unable to move whilst a being from the present time period is observing them, though someone smarter than me will have to explain exactly how that's meant to work in the comments below. What I can say is that it's absolute nightmare fuel, and it taps into multiple deep-rooted human fears all at the same time. Firstly, they remove the certainty and therefore inherent safety we generally associate with inanimate objects. Then you have the fact that their movement happens during a gap in your perception, which sends your amygdala into overdrive with the various scenarios it starts to play out. And thirdly, they are behaving very much like a predator, stalking your movements, and thus triggering your evolutionary fear of being hunted by wild beasts, or indeed other humans. Anyway, if after that explanation you still want to experience this pure horror for yourself, then you're going to need to make your way over to Lindenvale Cemetery, which can be found at this location on the map, and enter the chapel to trigger the angels' extremely creepy behaviour. There's no real reward or benefit associated with this, just the potential for a sleepless night. Another secret location that makes reference to popular media, this time in relation to the very first season of Game of Thrones, is the hidden sky cell that can be found at the top of Kaer Gelen. This one is extremely easy to miss on the basis that it's on a random island in Skellige that you don't really have much reason to visit unless you're doing the Bear School scavenger hunt. Then, even if you do visit, you need to take the decision to clear the fort of pirates, defeat their leader, and then loot the nearby set of prison keys. And these keys will allow you to open the cell next door. If you do, you will find yourself looking at a very familiar scene, providing that you've either read or watched Game of Thrones. This scene is of course the sky cell in which Tyrion was imprisoned by Lysa Stark during his ill-fated visits to the Vale of Arryn. As with the original, one side of the cell is completely open on the basis that any attempt to escape would presumably mean plummeting to your inevitable death. However, this is where the Witcher version of the sky cell really falls short, as it feels like if you were reasonably determined, for example if you were about to be brutally executed in the castle courtyard the next day, you could probably escape this one, though you would then have to brave the icy waters of Skellige and would probably freeze to death shortly afterwards. Anyway, if you look at the dead dwarf sprawled across the cell floor, there is little doubt that it's supposed to represent Tyrion Lannister, due to the rather distinctive scar on his face, even if the timelines don't necessarily track for when he got that scar. Also, in the Witcher version of events, it appears that Tyrion has met a rather different fate and has perished in the sky cell rather than having been saved by Bronn. Which, now I think about it, might be a preferable fate to the journey that the real Tyrion faced throughout the following 7 seasons of the show. Another nice little detail actually is that when you enter the cell, Geralt will actually remark that it's a shame the dwarf didn't know how to fly, a fun little reference to some of the dialogue from the book or television series. As with the previous location, there aren't really any rewards associated with this cell specifically, though there are many rewards that you can find around the fort itself. But for Game of Thrones fans playing The Witcher, you've got to experience this at least once. The next location on our list, however, does actually offer a tangible reward, a big old stash of buried treasure. But once again, it's incredibly easy to miss due to the fact that it's one of the game's very few completely unmarked quests. It all starts high in the mountains to the north of Kaer Gelen in the Skellige Isles, where you will find a lone skeleton carrying a mysterious poem. And due to the lack of quest marker or objective, you would be forgiven for looting the corpse, ignoring the note, and then immediately moving on. However, you'd be making a big mistake, as this note is actually a riddle containing clues that will guide you to a nearby hidden treasure. It reads as follows. When the sun peaks in the skies, seek where shadow's end lies. Where light into darkness folds, you'll find treasures untold. While it's not immediately obvious what the answer is, it doesn't take a huge amount of thinking to work it out. And not to speak ill of our skeletal friend here, but I'd probably be a bit embarrassed if I took so long to figure it out that I literally died in the process. The riddle clearly indicates that at a certain time of day, specifically noon, you will be able to follow a shadow to its end in order to find this treasure of significant value. It doesn't tell you which shadow, but as the skeleton is propped up against a pretty distinctive rock formation, this should give you a fairly clear indication. So if you continue to follow that train of thought, meditate until midday, and then follow the shadow down the mountain, you will find the hidden treasure half buried in this woodland area where the light and darkness meet, basically the gap in between the two stones. And it contains a stash of valuable items and crafting materials. It's not exactly game-changing, but it's still very cool, and it feels like a throwback to when RPGs didn't hold our hands quite so much. Moving on to a small stretch of ocean that offers perhaps the rarest sighting in the entire game. In fact, it was so rarely encountered that CDPR themselves chose to highlight its existence during one of the Witcher anniversary celebrations, as so few players had discovered it naturally. This obscurity is due to the fact that this encounter will only happen between 1 and 3 AM in game time, and only in an otherwise uninteresting patch of ocean next to the small islands located between Skellige and Hindisfjall, which is a pretty specific requirement, especially given that it only appears for the briefest of moments. Now, if you do happen to be in the right place at the right time, you will witness a ghost ship rise from the ocean's depths, ride the waves for a few seconds, and then plummet back into the dark, brackish waters. This ghost ship is believed to be the Flying Redanian, an obvious reference to the Flying Dutchman, a legendary ghost ship that is featured in real-world ocean lore since as early as the 17th century, and yes, in the Pirates of the Caribbean movie franchise. In naval folklore, spotting the Flying Dutchman was considered to be an ill omen, suggesting that your own vessel, and presumably those upon it, were about to meet their demise. However, in The Witcher, it's completely harmless, despite it being really quite intimidating when you first spot it from your tiny little sailboat. But then again, I jumped out of my seat the first time the whale surfaced next to my boat, so perhaps I'm just a bit of a nervous sailor. Okay, moving on, and if Witchers weren't already hopped up enough on their patented cocktails of incredibly strong drugs, it appears that a couple of enterprising individuals, at some point in the past, decided to set up the Temerian equivalent of a meth lab, something that players are likely to miss due to having no other reason to visit its location, combined with the fact that if you do happen to visit the location but you haven't yet completed Kira Metz's questline as part of the main quest, then you won't have the correct item to reveal the hidden entrance, so you'll miss it anyway. The secret entrance I'm talking about is hidden to the back of a cave that you can find to the north of Novigrad, just across the water. All you need to do is gain access to the cave itself, defeat the golem that you'll find roaming around in there, and then use the magical lamp that you retrieve with Kira Metz, known as the Eye of Neheleni, to reveal the secret entrance at the back of that cave. This will reveal a passage to a mysterious laboratory that features various alchemical devices that you will soon find out are intended to be used to manufacture Fistech, a highly addictive drug in the Witcher universe, and among all of this lab equipment you will find 2 skeletal corpses. Now, if you're a Breaking Bad fan, your spidey senses may already be tingling at this point. But the intent of the reference becomes even clearer when you read the journal found on one of the corpses. It makes reference to the frustration of the author at the stupidity of a character called Jester. Specifically, he complains that his incompetent partner had one job, which was to create the incantation to force the golem outside to guard their secret laboratory, and that Jester's failure to do so has led to their demise, as clearly evidenced by the scene in front of you. Of course, there is one major difference from the show here in terms of how things played out, but I won't spoil that for people who haven't seen it yet, if such people still exist. Anyway, unlike some of the other locations, it is actually worth rummaging around here and doing a bit of looting. There's even a second hidden wall that you can uncover by using Ard, and you can find a bunch of stuff behind that as well. Some of it you can flog for decent gold, and some of it is just useful crafting materials. It won't make you as rich as Walter White, but at least it'll get you started in the Empire business. Speaking of hidden locations concealed behind magical illusions, our next entry takes us beneath the streets of Novigrad to the secret resting place of a higher vampire. And if you're wondering how a location beneath the game's most populous city, within the network of sewers and tunnels that you frequently explore through various quest lines, can be in any way obscure, then you're asking a very reasonable question. However, if you never come across this one particular hidden wall while exploring the Novigrad sewers, or are too focused on another objective to notice it, then you will miss this location and the associated quest entirely. This is due to the fact that there is simply no clue to its existence outside of the wall itself. However, if you do open up the secret passage, you will find yourself in a tomb. And within that tomb, rather mysteriously, as there is no other obvious entrance, is a professor who's supposedly looking for an elven manuscript that he believes to be sealed within the sarcophagus in the middle of the room. He asks you to open up the sarcophagus for him, and if, against your better judgment, given that it has vampire written all over it, you do choose to open it up for him, then surprise surprise, you find a vampire. This vampire asks you what year it is, and then gets pretty cheesed off that you've woken him ahead of schedule. He even uses some rather choice language that I won't repeat because I like making ad revenue on YouTube. Now, at this point, you can either leave him alone, probably the sensible choice, or you can open the sarcophagus again on the professor's insistence, causing Sleeping Beauty to violently attack you, and of course forcing you to put him down for good. You'll get some quest experience for your efforts, and let's be honest, this vampire probably didn't have very good intentions when he did finally wake up, given how quickly he jumped to trying to murder you for simply not letting him hit the snooze button on his alarm. So you probably did Novigrad a favour overall. If you want to find this location, then the secret entrance can be found by entering the Novigrad sewers through this tunnel by the Tretogor Gate. You just need to climb down the ladders and then follow the path that I'm taking now until you come across this section of loose brickwork, at which point you can use Ard on it to open up the secret passage to the tomb. Okay, moving on to a small detail that, despite having no impact on your gameplay whatsoever, will still delight fans of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. As hidden near the town of Vennek in the Velen region is the lair of one of the most feared creatures in fantasy history. As you approach the cave entrance, you will first lay eyes upon this creature, surrounded by the blood, gore, and broken bones of its many victims. Of course, the beast may at first appear harmless to the untrained eye, but its soft white fur and cute little nose mask a terrible secret. This rabbit is a ruthless and gleeful killer, based of course on the equally feared Killer Rabbit of Kaer Gelen from the 1975 classic film. Now, unlike the film version, this rabbit isn't going to leap 6 feet in the air and remove your head. But CDPR clearly wanted to make sure that nobody accidentally ruined the joke, because if you try to attack it, you'll quickly discover that the rabbit is completely immortal. So while Geralt can slay cyclopses, vampires and griffins, every good witcher still needs to recognise when they've met their match. And then there's only one thing left to do. Run away! Run away! Sorry, terrible impression. It's a fairly minor detail compared to some of the other entries on this list, but there is some loot in the cave, and it's a fun reference to one of the most famous comedy scenes ever put to film, so it's worth checking out at least once. Another small but extremely easy detail to miss can be found at the Palace of Vizima, a place that you typically visit simply to progress the story and then bugger off back to the proper exploration zones, which is the primary reason that many people miss the hidden chamber tucked away within the palace walls. However, if you use your Witcher senses in the courtyard, you will notice a loose brick that, if interacted with, will open a secret cobweb-strewn chamber nearby, complete with 2 chests and a skeleton. Now, there are a number of theories in circulation as to who this skeleton belonged to. You'd think that the most obvious answer would be Sir Roderick de Wet, as within the smaller of the two chests there is a letter addressed to him. A letter discussing the prospect of turning Princess Ada of Temeria back into a Striga, which, as it happens, is a plotline from The Witcher 1. However, it all gets a bit confusing as during that storyline, Geralt has options to kill both the princess and Roderick de Wet himself. So any conclusion as to who this skeleton might be has to assume a particular outcome from that quest that has been carried over as canon to The Witcher 3. Or alternatively, perhaps it's just some poor palace cleaner who got stuck in there trying to dust all of the cobwebs. I guess we'll never know for sure. Of course, the most infuriating thing about this secret is that the larger chest is a complete catfish that you cannot interact with, which is just unnecessarily cruel in my opinion. But the cool thing about this particular secret is that pretty much every player to ever touch the game walks right by it, and I'd be willing to bet that very few of that number actually ever notice it. Well, now you will. Okay, let's move on to something a bit meatier, the mystery of the Destroyed Bastion and its cryptic link to another CDPR game, Cyberpunk 2077. The interaction at this location throws Geralt into one of the more unexpected and bizarre events that you'll come across in The Witcher. The Destroyed Bastion itself can be found to the south of the crossroads, and at first it appears to be nothing more than scenery, effectively. There's no obvious way of accessing the interior. However, if you take your time to explore the 3 smaller ruins nearby, which most players are very unlikely to do unless prompted, then you will find a series of 3 levers. And if you activate each of them, then a golem will spawn between the 3 ruins at this location I'm showing right now, and once you defeat it, a mysterious portal will spawn on the hill nearby. By the way, it's worth noting here that certain things can bug this interaction. For example, you may notice my character change halfway through this footage, as the character that I was using at first was from a save file that I started long before Next Gen existed, which bugged the whole interaction for me and the golem wouldn't spawn at all. So I had to make a brand new character just for this bit of footage, hence the extremely weak Geralt in this clip that I had to enable God mode for just so he could survive it. Anyway, if you're brave enough to step into this random portal, then you will be transported to the top of the previously inaccessible Destroyed Bastion. And at first it all seems pretty peaceful up top, but the second you drop down to the lower levels, all hell breaks loose, and you'll find yourself swarmed by almost unkillable wraiths. I say almost as for some reason they can be killed with the Piercing Cold mutation, but if you don't have that, then you're wasting your time by trying to fight them. Now, if you do manage to survive long enough, you may notice 2 dormant crystals in the second room. These represent your only way out, as if you activate them using the Ard sign, then a portal will spawn in the middle of the room and you can step into that portal to get the hell out of there. But ultimately you're left thinking, what was the point of that? There was no quest, no reward, and nothing really happened apart from a bunch of angry wraiths tried to murder you. Well, it turns out there was one other ridiculously easy to miss detail on the wall in that second room. One that most people aren't ever going to notice because there's a bunch of angry wraiths trying to tear them apart. However, particularly eagle-eyed members of the Witcher community noticed an inscription on the wall, and if deciphered, that inscription reveals the same code FF06B5 that can be found on a number of statues scattered across Night City, the city in Cyberpunk 2077, which presents a real mystery, and actually this mystery remained unsolved for quite a long time. I won't spoil it for you as it's in relation to a different game rather than The Witcher, and frankly I don't even play that game, but nonetheless this is definitely one of the more surprising and very difficult to stumble across hidden locations in The Witcher 3, even before you get into the cryptic connections to mysteries in a completely different game. And finally, we arrive at what is certainly the most deliberately well-hidden location in the entire game, and probably the least visited of them all. In fact, I'd say definitely the least visited. That's not because it involves solving a riddle or that it only appears at a certain time of day, but because this location was never really intended to be found at all. It's not even inside the normal bounds of the game world. In fact, you have to install the mods to even get anywhere near it, but nonetheless it is a genuine location that the devs put in the game. And I always wonder whether they thought at the time that anyone would ever find it, though I assume they probably did, as they understand better than anyone how modders leverage the technology and data available to work out almost anything. I am of course talking about the developer canvas, and if you want to see it firsthand, then you'll firstly need to install a free camera mod, or a mod that lets you wander beyond the normal boundaries of the world, and then climb to the very peak of Mount Gorgon, which by the way you can access from the Toussaint region. If you do choose to venture into the unrendered wilderness in this way, you will eventually find a giant canvas displaying a real-life image of the CDPR development team, or at least the team at the time of The Witcher 3's release back in 2015. There's nothing else to this location, no special loot, interaction or buff. It's just a wholesome reminder of the group of people that gave us this wonderful game to start with, and who have enabled me to still be milking the content on YouTube over a decade later. So, cheers guys.